David, it's always great to see you. Am I sort of getting a bit too overheated here? That things seem to be changing rather fast on things like freedom of movement and freedom of speech and those kind of things.
Oh, Mark, I mean, what a terrible thing to say that you get overheated. It's part of the charm. But it's also, really, I do too, it's also essential in banging home these big changes. You see, I think there's a major connection between the last segment of the show, Rotherham and the child abuse and the MP and whatever, and what you're talking about now. If you have a society which lacks natural unity, if you've got a society where there is this wonderful thing called diversity, with your imam living next to your gay couple, do you know what? We've ceased to be a nation. We've become an empire. And OK, you're quoting de Tocqueville on emperors, but empires have always had to be managed from the top. They've always been managed by bureaucracies. And what we're now seeing is a new kind of bureaucracy. It thinks it's a bureaucracy of virtue. Because we can't be trusted. You know, a gay man and a Muslim can't actually be trusted quite to negotiate with each other. So they've got to be put in an order. And, you know, when you were talking about which victim group comes top, well, of course, you know, an imam comes very much above a mere gay man. And a gay man very much above a white man. And, of course, a Muslim woman comes pretty well top. So, but it's all got to be arbitrated. You've got to have rules. And the rules, I'm afraid, have got to be enforced. And going alongside all of this, we've now got a means of doing it. Your emperor's emissary only had what? He got a horse. He might have a local police constable. He got a few informers on the ground. Now, of course, we have the internet. We have this complete record of what people are saying, much of what they're doing. So this is why the police, bizarrely, don't deal with child abuse. They focus on somebody who emits a rude tweet to one of these privileged groups. Do you see what I'm getting at? That we are, because it's a society which can't manage itself. If you go back to the world that de Tocqueville was talking about, he was talking about America at the end of the 18th, the beginning of the 19th century. It was by and large a self-regulating society. People were much like each other. They achieved their own relationships. Because we're so wildly different, because the state says one person is better than another, you've got to really have, for the first time, the complete policing of everyday life. And it's as I said, it's a benign dictatorship.
Yeah, that's actually a hugely important point, David, because the fact that we have all kinds of people jostling around within these islands means that we necessarily need a more powerful state to mediate social relations between people who don't have a lot in common, basically.
Yeah, and also is because the state has decided that on the whole, bizarrely, minority groups, very often minority groups that actually hate the state, need to be privileged. I mean, so the state is, you know, we had, under old-fashioned socialism, we had the redistribution of wealth. We're now getting a deliberate attempt at redistributing social and political capital, at actually redistributing cultural capital. We're saying that the old traditional culture is terribly bad. We should be promoting, you know. The bizarre thing, my own University of Cambridge accepts sponsorship from Stormzy. If Stormzy's lyrics, you know, which are violent, misogynist, profoundly homophobic, if they were uttered by a white man, the university would go, God, we couldn't touch such a person. But because who he is, his skin colour, he is privileged. And this is this terrible thing. You know, you were talking about these deeply old-fashioned concepts like equality before the law. What if you are so old-fashioned? You know, you need to keep up. We need to talk more often. You know, I need to introduce you to this new world. And of course, if it's bad in Britain, in Canada, you know, under the regime of Trudeau the Perfect, it is so much further down that road.
Do you think that, well, let's put it this way. I think a lot of the hardcore craziness generally gets invented in America. Then, in that rather pathetic way they do with cheeseburgers and pop songs, Her Majesty's Dominions adopt it a couple of years later and try to play catch-up. But continental Europe doesn't seem quite on board with the nutso wokeness. And in fact, even someone like Macron prides himself on speaking out contre le wokisme, as they call it there. Do you think there's some kind of fundamental difference between the Anglo world and the Europeans on this stuff?
Oh, yes. I mean, there is. Again, funnily, the Anglo world on the whole used to believe in freedom. But because, you see, I think also what's going on now with this attack on liberty, as you correctly describe it, it is a wave of Puritanism. What we're actually seeing is a new religion, the old religion of the Anglo-Saxon world, puritanical Christianity, which, you know, had all sorts of, in many ways, very good manifestations. The anti-slavery campaigns, the abolition campaigns, in a more controversial way, the attack on alcohol, the whole attempt at in early 20th century America, because of the terrible problems of drinking and so on. All of these are forms of Puritanism. What I think we've got is an attempt at imposing a new sort of morality. And I've been looking at this in quite considerable detail. If you go back to the very beginnings of the Puritan world, of the world of reform at the beginning of the 16th century, what's extraordinary is it moves even more quickly than the whole revolution that's associated with Twitter and tweeting and wokery. You know, you can date wokery beginning in about 2009, really getting going in 2015 and roughly culminating now essentially through the means of Twitter and particularly the share button, which enables you to do the pile-on and whatever. You know, if you go back to the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, it's very, very similar. You've got a chap, you've got Martin Luther, you've got a critical theory, you've got Erasmus and his views of the language of the New Testament, and you've got a media revolution, you've got printing, and you've got the viral bit, which is actually doing it not in Latin, which only 10 people can read, but in German or English or French, which everybody can read. And do you know what? Those early stages of the Reformation move faster in the 16th century than the woke revolution has done in the 20th. So this is why it is very much entrenched in the Anglo-Saxon world. We're the natural home of Puritanism. It's why it starts in America. Blame the Mayflower for the good and the bad.
Yeah. No, that's certainly true. And the point, that's an interesting point about the Protestant Reformation, except that this new religion doesn't allow for the possibility of redemption. So we have white kindergartners in certain American school districts being told that they are inherently evil just from the colour of their skin, which is kind of confusing for a 5 or 6 year old.
Yeah, but sorry, this is authentic Puritanism. The Puritans didn't believe everybody was equally saved. The doctrine of Puritanism is the doctrine of the elect. It's the belief that there is a group which is privileged, which is predestined to salvation, just like the woke, and the rest of us are wicked. It's Puritanism which is responsible for the witch hunt. You know, the witch hunts happen in places like Scotland. They don't happen generally in England, except in weird Puritan places like East Anglia. But of course they're everywhere in freedom-loving Massachusetts. You know, that's why the Crucible is based there. You see what I mean? A Twitter storm is very much like the treatment that was meted out to a suspected witch. You were plunged into water.
No.
If you sank, you were of course innocent, but you drowned. But if you floated, you were a witch and you were burned. And that's exactly what a Twitter storm does. So again, Puritanism had no doctrine of forgiveness. That's sloppy religion. That's, Catholicism or Anglicanism, and it's relaxed about it. Whereas so the woke has taken over directly. And the other thing that's very striking about the Protestant Reformation is its violence. The violence of the attack on statues, the violence of the attack on stained glass, but also the violence of its language, the sheer hatred. You see what I mean? The resemblances are just astonishing. And this is why it's affecting us. We are going through, well, the Americans talked about 2015, not as the Great Awakening, which is one of these various movements of Puritanism, the abolition of slavery, the attempt at teetotalism and all the rest of it. They talked about 2015 as the Great Awakening. So it's part of that pattern. And you get it on your side of the Atlantic, in Her Majesty's dominions there. We get it here in, Her Majesty's dominions here, but in a bit of a dilute form, a little bit less extreme, and without quite those Puritan passions of America, thank God.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.